Good morning, everybody. Good morning, good morning. Good morning, good morning. Hope everybody is doing well. I am doing pretty good and trying to get everything going today. I haven't been on for a minute because I've been out of town and doing things, and so I wanted to make sure that I got on today and had conversation and talked and did things. And so here I am, bright and early before I go and do my own shit for the day. So I hope everybody is doing wonderful. I had a great time. I went and did a pirate event, which means I got to dress up as a fairy all weekend long, which was a lot of fun. I got ears that I was able to put in. Have a great one, Kylie. Mornings, Marshall. And so I got to dress up as a fairy, and I had ears, and I had a pretty crown that had little horns in it. It was a lot of fun. And my big inflatable wings, because I have big inflatable wings. I can even maybe, no, that's not the way to do it. Watch me learn how to do shit in real time. Maybe not. I'm stuck at this shit, right? Oh, yes. They changed some things up. So, did I get, there we go. Me as a fairy. There we go. Me as a fairy. I'm sorry, YouTube, I can't show from there. Yeah, I don't think I can. So me as a fairy. And I will try and put a picture up on YouTube of the fairy so people can see from YouTube later. But I got to do that. And that was so much fun. I really enjoy playing dress up, right? Like I really enjoy feeling like I'm a kid again. And that time in our life before, we felt like we had to like fall into other people's ideas of what we're supposed to be doing. To me, it's really important to try and get back to that in a lot of ways. Sounds great, Kylie. Thank you so much. And thank you for letting me know, since I know you mod in here a lot. And so it makes me know that you're here, but not actually focused. And that is helpful. So, but I like playing dress up because it gives me the ability to just kind of like being idealized of what I feel like I should be, or, things like that. It also gives me the idea to experiment and to play around. And it gives me the idea to kind of feel like magical, I guess, sometimes, like feel maybe even more connected in a weird way, right? So for me, playing dress up is really great. Hi, Storyteller. So for me, it's doing dress up and stuff like that is a lot of fun. So I did that this last weekend for an event, but I've been just busy doing stuff, and that's why I had to leave halfway through the weekend last week, or halfway through the week last week, and then recovery for me is never an easy thing. So the man in the back is Kinnis and Kinnis image. No, that's a Tom Borkland image. And on one of the things I actually have it saying that, but I don't on this one. It's a Tom Borkland image of a Gravatian. Gravatian is a time period from roughly, I think the oldest it goes is like 27,000 to like 30,000 years. Gravatian and Allalatian or something like that. It's really hard for me to like pronounce it and understand the word just from reading it. They're a group, and I think the Gravatian is prior to the Allalatian. But this is the same group, and it's actually a couple of different groups, but it's a culture. So a couple of different maybe nations within a culture across the southwest portion of Western Eurasia, or of Eurasia. So like France, Mediterranean, the Iberian Peninsula. The Solutreans are at the same time period, and I think they're also like part of the same culture, but I can't remember exactly if the Solutreans are part of the same culture in the Iberian Peninsula. But I know that the Gravatians of the Aleolasians are in the kind of Mediterranean and France region around 27,000 years ago. Maybe it's 31,000 years ago. My dates sometimes can be a little bit off. And until about 15, 16,000 years ago. Yeah, they're early Europeans, absolutely. He has the headdress from the uh, or what is perceived could be one of the possible interpretations of the headdress of the Venus of Willendorf. So one of the possible interpretations of the headdress of Venus of, or of the hair, or what is going on with the head of Venus of Willendorf. This is like one of the interpretations of that. So my understanding, though, sometimes this changes, but my current understanding is that the Gravatians and the Aleolasians are ancestral populations of most of the people in that area. So they were like a 10,000, 15,000 year period, really, to my memory. And again, remember, my dates can be a little bit off sometimes. And this one is not something I focus on. I just really love this picture because of the interpretation based on the Venus of Willendorf. So with that, I believe that they're like a 10,000, 15,000 year time period. My memory serves between 15 to 18,000 years ago is the last of their peoples that are like their culture. And to my understanding, with the genetics that they've done prior, we are looking at the ancestral population of the local peoples already. So we are looking at cultures that would have descended down into Latin cultures, as in the Latin tribes, as in the Italian peninsula. The Italian tribes is another, I don't remember if Latin or Italian is, Latin's like the language and Italian's like the place or something like that. But the Italian tribes, the Celtic tribes, and probably some of the Germanic tribes. You might also look at well, this is like well prior to we're finding the earliest sapiens in Britain. So we're probably we're looking prior to like Otzi and prior to like um, Cheddarman. So when we're looking at them, we do see both Otzi and Cheddarman are still really dark by the time the Otzi and Cheddarman come around. And so the Gravatian is looking at like 27,000 years ago to like 14, 18, 15,000 years ago, something along the from the late 20s to the late teens. So, and then you see that, so if they're like 15,000 years ago, Cheddarman is like 10,000 years ago, so another 5,000 years after that. And then Otzi is like 8,000, 6,000 years ago, something like that. And Otzi is still really dark skin. Otzi just had the recent DNA testing that they did on Otzi, or not testing, but the reevaluation of Otzi's DNA has changed perception on Otzi, also changed regional descendants on Otzi. So prior, we believed that Otzi's regional descendants, his father's people were regionally Swedish, and his mother's people were regionally Swiss Alps. I don't know which one of these changed in the latest shift. Now we believe that his descendant people on one of the sides is actually Turkish. Um, Most likely, this is a change from his mother's Swiss Alps, um, because of the way that these mountain ranges are kind of working, and the way that things are coming around, like migration pathways of ease, right? So I would state that that's most likely his mother's side, and then his father's side would most likely still be Swedish descendant. That doesn't necessarily mean that's what it panned out with. Thank you, thank you. So with so this may be changing the space of the Gravachian's descendants as well, right? So like as we're reevaluating the DNA and we're looking at it differently, what has been the Gravachian's descendants might actually start changing, might actually be a different space, right? I just want to always make sure that I'm giving that like down and double on that. Oh, oh, do I need to turn something on so that it'll go into closed caption? Sorry, I know my live paused for a second first. Let me see if let's see if I can fix the caption issue. I'm not seeing how to turn them on in any way from my end. Um, I know I'm kind of paused on the conversation and I apologize. I want to see if I can make sure that I have captions availability. No, all of this stuff isn't about live streaming the captions. I have no clue. IQ tests don't work for me. I can't maths very well. Maths doesn't work for me. It's a language I don't understand. Um, so I do want to talk about a couple of different things today. Just a couple of things that people have asked me about and people have mentioned. So I was talking about the deification of narcissism, othering as a means of control. Hey, beautiful. Evil is manufactured. Humanity is nonviolent. We were talking about these things, and we're going to talk about these things as well today, just because these are all very important points that I think that we all really understand. We just have a hard time really like seeing because we're so indoctrinated into a thought process, right? And so I definitely want to talk about a few of these points. Um, a couple of really big things that I really want to talk about, but I really haven't done a whole lot of talk about. I have done like a video on maybe is like sacred gender. This is something that for a lot of people, there's this disconnect because of the indoctrination that we've all received, and B, there's this almost a lack of realizing. Excuse me. This is what I get for drinking carbonated beverages. Um, this lack of understanding because of indoctrination, but this lack of even realizing that it's actually a thing. Like there is actually something there that actually works really well, and that isn't toxic to who we are as people, right? And so when we're looking at sacred within gender, we have this idea that gender has roles. And we kind of have to get out of this idea that gender has roles. And so that's one reason that I put it as sacred gender instead of sacred gender roles, or the different sacred genders, right? The idea that the idea that anybody from the outside can label an entire group of people and put them in a specific role or decide what an entire group of people is all going to want to do, is all going to be good at, is all going to be positive, right? The idea that an entire group of people can be labeled, classified, put into this space, in this bubble, and everybody within that entire group of people will follow this is illogical, harmful, um, and almost hilarious in the level of stupidity that goes along with it, right? Ignorance, ignorance that goes along with it. And we see this in so many different things. Othering has a lot to do with this, right? Othering is one of those things that really kind of ties it down a lot more and really kind of is used within it. Like this is used to other, right? And so when we are looking at that, we see that this goes along with things like um, racism, uh, othering based on religion, othering based on nationality, right? All of these things where we go us versus them, all of these things where we decide our group does this and that group does that, right? So when we're looking at those things, fuck, Anthony, information that really needs to get out there 100%, and if people don't know it, absolutely, it's absolutely stuff that needs to get out there. Very distracting to my mind because it is stuff that really needs to get out there, but it is not the topic of conversation today, so my mind goes, let's visit the Congo. And so anyways, I need to make sure that I'm shifting this way, but you can go ahead and keep comment just so you know. um, when we're looking at the way that monolithicizing a group affects that group and affects the other peoples around it, the other communities around it, we can see the level of harm that this causes. And we see this concept really within gender because we see this concept of monolithicizing gender, right? Of making gender the priority, of making gender the distinguishing factor about a human being instead of their talents, instead of what sings to them, instead of what they're creative in, instead of what they make, instead of what they do, instead of who they are. We make gender this important thought process. And our concept of what gender is has changed significantly throughout the timeline of us, right? And when we look at the fact that gender, I can handle you talking about the Congo, but please don't put me in that category. I'm not here for that, just so you know. Besides the fact that I don't do anything that has male genitalia, just don't. Have nothing to do with it, have no desire for it. And I'm here to educate, not to hook up. So, uh, anyways, when we're looking at the way that gender, okay, I just don't like some things people consider compliments are not compliments to me. Anyways, when we are looking at the way that gender has shifted along our timeline as human beings, we can see that the way gender has shifted along our timelines as human beings, even to just come into play as something that is there, right? There is a significant amount of time when gender doesn't actually exist, when gender isn't actually a part of things. I am going to ask everybody as you're listening, if you're like on your phone staring at it, go ahead and smash the screen a bunch of times and try and get the likes up on this. It kind of gets it out a little bit more, and it kind of lifts it up in the algorithm. So if you just tap on it, it'll also give you like benefits within the group. The more you do on likes and stuff like that, it gives you like, or within the chat, right? It gives you like levels of your own within the chat. But I am going to ask for that because of the fact that uh, we're kind of down in the algorithm today. And when we're down in the algorithm, it's easier for me on some levels because there's not a lot of people, right? Uh, at the same point, it doesn't actually continue. Can't hear me? 1 second. Apologies for that. Can you hear me now? I think it was me. I had a call come in. Um, and sometimes when I have a call come in, it will mute me. It hadn't been lately, and so I didn't think it had, but thank you so much for letting me know. When we're looking at the way that gender has played a role, we can absolutely see that gender plays this role within us today that it didn't play before. We can also see where gender has the role of gender, or the understanding of what is masculine versus feminine, has changed completely over periods of time. Many people look at me and think that I dress very feminine, because I like colors that are today considered feminine. And I don't really like what is today considered masculine clothes for the most part. They're not comfortable for my body shape, A, and B, for me, they don't appear attractive, right? For my idea of how to dress, they don't appear attractive. So um, I will wear things that are more Vikinger, right, from that time period, or I will wear things from other time periods that might have been considered masculine or feminine within those time periods, understanding that during those time periods, masculine and feminine were different. Most people don't understand that we see the start of things like pink and velvet and lace and makeup and heels as masculine. We see that this is something that the males within society are using in the very start of society, or not society, very start of these introductions into society, right? When we see these things coming into society, we see these things coming into society as being masculine things, and yet we think of all of these things today as feminine things. And since we're looking at Inwita Ord on YouTube, it's just Inwita Ord with no dots. It should be at Inwita Ord. The email associated with it is awitaword@gmail. So it should be semi-easy. Let me know if you make it out over there. It's also at Inwita Ord, just one word, but I had a hard time finding it like that on my other YouTube the other day. So I'm not sure if that's completely it. You can click on the website in my bio, and in clicking on the website in my bio, it'll have on the bottom of the main page a link to my YouTube account you can click on. So when we are looking at this shift in the idea of what different things are when we look at gender, we can see that our idea of what gender is has shifted. So not only has our idea of the presence of gender shifted, our idea of what gender signifies has shifted. And these are things that are still very new, right? So when we look at the archaeological record, we can see Neanderthals' gender roles may have been reversed if they had gender roles. We see with Neanderthals that their females were, oh, fuck, what's that phrase? The sexual diaphorism, which means the sexual difference, biological sex difference in size between male and female. Like you see a gorilla, the male is very large and the female is significantly smaller. When you look at that sexual diaphorism, I'm not going to be able to say that word today. Within Neanderthals, we see that on average, Neanderthal women are larger than Neanderthal men are on average. Now, of course, there are some issues with Neanderthals DNA and the fact that, like, we have yet to find a Y DNA for Neanderthals. The only Y DNAs that we find are Y DNAs for sapien or Y DNAs for Denisovan, and the three Y DNAs we've seen in Neanderthals. So, does that mean that Neanderthals who had physical expressions of male genitalia and had the male role in the creation of offspring actually carried an X gene, considering the fact that, or an X chromosome, considering the fact that the Y chromosome is actually just a degraded X chromosome within sapien? That we don't know for positive, right? Like that could be the possibility. More of these larger Neanderthals who seem to be female could be male. I mean, we're just not understanding that, right? And yet, what it seems like is that within Neanderthals, the biological females within Neanderthals are significantly larger in size than the biological males in Neanderthals. This actually shifted our understanding of Neanderthals in a significant way because of the fact that throughout our looking at Neanderthals, we have looked at Neanderthals seeing um, this is a man because of the size of his skeleton, and this is a woman because of the size of her skeleton. And so when we're looking at that and we see that actually it's completely different than us, right? It's switched. A lot of the Neanderthals that we thought were male were in fact female. So we see that in places like, or in species or human communities like the Neanderthal community, that there is this lack of expression of gender role in the way that we think it is. We also see that within the Neanderthal community, there seems to be a more broad spread of who's performing what actions. And we do see, because we can look at skeletal attachments and see, are you throwing a spear or, stabbing things? Is this your activity on a regular basis? Are you grinding? Is this your activity on a regular basis? Because these things will wear and tear on the bone. These things will cause issues with the bone. And because when we're looking at that and these things are causing issues with the bone, we're seeing that you can tell kind of what they did in their life. If you are doing a lot of grinding, the shoulder girdle, the elbows, and the knees get wear and tear. If you're constantly using your right arm because you're right-handed to chuck a spear or to stab things or to flint knap or to do other kind of rough and heavy labor, especially things like spears, right? Because this is constantly doing the same motion with this hand, right? And because it's constantly doing this same motion, it provides wear here, heavier muscle attachments to this side of the body than to this side of the body, and wear here, right? And so because of that, when we're looking at that, we see that I would check the date on that, Hope, because the dating on that shifted last year or the year before. Like the understanding that female Neanderthals, when we're looking at the genetics, that the females of the Neanderthals actually seem to be the ones that be the larger of the species. So I would check when the NIH article is, or when their dating on it is. Like most of the time at the bottom of the website, it will tell you, this website was published in 2020 and it hasn't been updated since 2021, right? Yeah, see, and so that's why, and that's a lot of it is and see, that's where like there is this huge shift because we thought that the male Neanderthals were bigger than the female Neanderthals, right? Because we see that in us and we see this in other primates. And so when we get the DNA back and we find that the female Neanderthals are actually larger than the male Neanderthals, it's like, holy, like, there's a lot of people who are like, and the person who was my professor for both Neanderthals and paleoanthropology, Dr. Melanie Chang, who I believe I have a video of her YouTube lecture on my website, right? When we look at that, she's studying gender in Neanderthals, right? She's studying gender roles within Neanderthals, right? And so this is after I got out of school that it came in, and I saw that I was like, oh, I bet she's so excited, right? So I didn't save that article. I would go to Google Scholar, uh, Google sexual diaphorism. I can't remember the way to spell it or even how to pronounce the second word, but you can find that, right? in Neanderthals, sexual diaphragmism Neanderthals, and then make sure that you're looking at articles published within the last year or so. This isn't something I saved. I apologize. But it should be relatively easy to find, maybe within the last 5 years. Just because it was published 5 years ago doesn't mean that NIH would have updated it, right? After that. So, like, it might be as far back and it just became like CNN across my news feed, across most people's news feeds who I don't go and check Google Scholar every day. And I know I have a few scientific journals I subscribe to, but not a whole lot, right? And so it might be something that's a little bit older. It just hasn't gotten out there until the last year. So you can even go back as far as like 2010 when you're looking at it, though I actually wouldn't go back before. I think that my professor would have known that in like 2020. So I'm not sure because she knew a lot of other stuff that is just now coming out, like the ghost species. That's one of the things that I learned from her. So I'm not exactly sure on the dating, but you can probably go and Google Scholar that and find some information on it. When we're looking though at gender within us, this is something that starts where it really starts to become significant with us. That diaphragmism within Neanderthals is significant in the fact that we need to understand that our view of how things happens is not necessarily the correct way, right? Our understanding of what it means to be human, our understanding of what these things are is not necessarily the correct way. And so we need to understand as we're looking within these things that it's not that all the things that you have, or not that the things that you have been taught are wrong. It is that information changes. And when information changes, you must adapt to the new information. We are an adaptable species, right? Adaptation or die is kind of just what most species of anything is, right? You either adapt or you die, right? And so we are an adaptable species. And because we are an adaptable species, we need to understand that as new information comes along, we adapt our understanding. I grew up believing that if you shave an area of your body, that hair will grow back thicker, right? This is the information that science had put out in probably the 80s or the 90s, and my mother taught me. I didn't shave my legs until I was like 17 years old. I had very fine hair on my legs, right? And it's always in the sun, and I was always pretty dark, and my hair on my leg was always pretty light, and so you really couldn't see it, right? Um, and because of this, I had thought for a long time, and my mother had taught me, and this was the information then, that anytime you shave, the hair actually grows back thicker, and it will grow back darker, right? And so when my children are getting of an age in their teens, right? I'm a grandmother. Like, so when my children are in their teens and they're like, Mom, that's not true. Then my first response is, yeah, it is. You don't know what you're talking about because I'm mom. I know what I'm talking about. You don't know what you're talking about, right? I had to find out. I had to go and look. I had to not automatically decide that they didn't know what they were talking about because they were younger. And I had to go and I needed to find the information only to find out that they're right. Hair does not grow back thicker and darker when you shave your hair. So, when we're looking at things throughout life, we have to understand that we have to adapt when new information comes onto the scene. Adaptation, when new information comes onto the scene, is this very strong part of who we are. Without adaptation, when new information comes into the scene, we would not exist. It is that adaptation that gives us our tools. It is that adaptation that gives us our houses. It is that adaptation that makes us able to live in different environments. We are one of the few creatures that can live in multiple different environments, right? And it is because of the fact that we are highly adaptive and we adapt our adaptations, right? So our physical being is highly adaptive. Our mind adapts our adaptations, right? And because of that, we're able to fit pretty much in any environment, whereas a lot of other species cannot. So when we're looking at this and we look at the way that gender exists prior to us, there's been a couple of significant articles over the last year, actually. There was a video that I did about the understanding that we can actually see the third biological sex, which is intersex, which is several different diverse So the word is mutation, but I want you to understand that everything about you is a mutation. You mutated into this. Okay. So um, there is this ability, and that this mutation that we're currently talking about has been around since the start of time. We can find intersex. There was a Klinefelter's case that was found in the archaeological record several thousand years ago, a few thousand years ago. Got it, the date. Um, and we can see in this somebody who is a member of the biologically intersexed group, because we have three biological sexes: male, female, and intersex, right? Good to see you, Ami. And when we're looking at the fact that we have three biological sexes, male, female, and intersex, we can absolutely see this in the biological record. We can actually, archaeological record, and we can absolutely see this throughout the course of our history. Most people aren't going to know that they're intersex unless they have a dual expression of gender, sex, right? Like, so maybe somebody who has both genitalia, or maybe like the three groups. There's three groups of people on this planet who are in specific regions, who will be born looking for all external purposes female, and at puberty, their, for lack of better words, their balls drop, almost literally, and they become male. Their clitoris extends, like the penis is the extension of the clitoris, and when the testes drop, it becomes, they're able to impregnate women. There was, and I can't find the book myself, but I have seen the book, and I have seen reviews on it. I've got to see if I can find the guy who did a bunch of information on it. But there's a book called The Nun Called Frank, which talks about a specific case. And there are documentations of women who were nuns who, at puberty, their balls dropped and they became male and were able to impregnate other nuns, right? So we do see that there. Did you chew up my chopstick? You did. I was just going to reach down and take that, you little. This is my dog. I was going to reach down and grab that. I'll be right back. I need to put something on my lips because they're starting to dry out. I love you. You still shouldn't have chewed up my chopstick. Okay, sorry. When I talk for a long time, my lips start getting weird. So there is evidence of intersex that we've seen throughout history, right? Intersex is not a new thing. It has never been a new thing. And when we look at other species, we see intersex exists. We need to start getting rid of this idea that biological sex dictates who you're going to be, has anything to do with who you are going to be within your life, right? And B, that one second, I had an A and a B, and now the B has slipped my mind. Sorry, lots of mental health issues, and sometimes, and just mental issues, right? Sometimes things slip my mind. So we need to get away from this idea that biological sex dictates really anything about you. When we're looking at how these things interplay throughout the course of history, our idea of how they have played throughout history, written word, and anything prior to written word is prehistory, right? And written word is only like 6,000 years old in its oldest spaces, except for the caves that we have found that have Neanderthal writings, because Neanderthals apparently had writing and had early Homo sapien writings, Gervasian period, actually. So dudes, right, here's like writings, kind of. Perimenopause so far, thankfully. Like, I haven't hit the full menopause state to my knowledge yet, though. I no longer have a uterus, so who knows when I'll hit the full menopause state. I'm just happy I'm no longer got any uterus, right? When we look at the role of gender throughout history, and then we look at the role of gender prior to history, we see that up until recently, our ideas of what gender roles played are completely false. When we're looking at what we call hunter-gatherer groups, and so when we look at the way that people interact and the way that we label interactions with lifestyles, we need to understand first that the word tribe means community based on genetic lineage, and band means community based on non genetic lineage, right? So, based on community needs, several different people interacting, not having the same genetic lineage. Whereas a tribe might have started because of a matriarch and her 10 daughters. Her 10 daughters form 10 different clans or family groups within, and they all marry outside. And so the nation or the community is based on, are you a member of the family group, right? Or have you married into the family group? This is how your citizenship within the community comes across or is gained. Whereas a band, your citizenship within the community comes across from you're needed within the community. There's several different groups, right? So that's one thing that I always like to try and clear up. We also need to look at hunter-gatherer versus collector. So when we're looking at the way that prior groups worked before settled agriculture, before monoculture, right? Our monoagriculture, when we're looking at that, what we're looking at is groups that worked within two different ways. Now, we call those who migrate to get their sustenance, who move on a yearly pattern, follow either an animal or a seasonal planting, or not planting, but a seasonal plant schedule, like the way that the plants are growing, right? We call those groups hunter-gatherer groups. We call those who stay in one place and build a community and then leave that community to go and get those sustenances throughout the year collectors. So if somebody has a migration pattern of maybe 10 miles, right? And in this migration pattern of 10 miles, they follow different parts of the seasonal cycle, right? So maybe they like to winter down by a creek, and maybe they like to summer up in the mountains, right? And they're following, or maybe they're following herds of deer in the way that deer are going back and forth during their summer and their winter, right? So if we're looking at that group would be considered a hunter-gatherer group. When we are looking at this, and we understand that humans are omnivores, which means that we must have both meat and vegetation substance, herbivore, omnivore. Yeah, herbs. They must have the vegetative substance. We have realized within the last year, and there's been a couple of articles that have come out within the last year where the archaeological and anthropological community has realized that you can actually get all of those nutrients from hunting alone. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't get vegetation. What is called the rudiment in the stomach, the fresh food that the herbivore that you are killing has just eaten, right? And we mainly kill herbivores, not not carnivores, right? So the fresh food in the stomach the fresh vegetable in the stomach that they've recently eaten, we can cut open that stomach and get all of our dietary needs from the rudiment within the stomach of the herbivores that we kill. And so there have been articles that have come across recently that are showing that women are most likely hunting as well as men. There's no evidence that shows that women are staying at home gathering, and home doesn't really work anyways, and men are out hunting. And when we look at the way that we're looking at small communities of people, right, and we look at the way that we're looking at predator interaction and tools, right, and game interaction, right, it makes a lot of sense to have the most people you possibly can to go hunting. The most people that you possibly can to go hunting means that you guys are going to take down something easier. You're less likely to be injured. You're less likely to have a predator attack you guys and nobody can help you. Even less likely to have a predator attack you because you're a large group. If you want to pick out the largest bull in the herd, you can pick out the largest bull in the herd because there's 30 of you compared to that one large bull, right? So if you have a band or a tribe, a community of 50 people, which is a rather large community size for a prehistoric time. Well, not prehistoric because we still have a few thousand years prior to the history of writing where we have settled agriculture, but say uh, prior to 10,000 years ago, if you're looking at, and still up to 100 years ago in some spaces, right? If you're looking at a group where you are um, living in communion, right? And you are a migratory, a lot of times prior to 10,000 years ago, you're going to get groups where you're looking at 30 to 50 people, right? You're not looking at a huge you're not looking at a huge group of people, right? So having a few people stay back in the cave to take care of the children or whatever your housing situation is, to take care of the children, to make sure that the fire stays going or doesn't get lost, maybe to make some clothing or to do other things or to weave baskets or to, flint knap different things that can be done within the hearth area of your life. And then sending 40 people out to hunt a massive game animal, that is going to ensure your survival a lot more than only sending the 10 men you have in your group out to hunt this massive game animal. Ami, is that sustenance dependent on local ecology? Are you talking about the rudiment within the stomach? Anthony, I'll have to defend the woman in a fight against a guy. It's been like that for eons. So, one of the worst things that we have done as a society is teach our children don't hit girls. When we taught our sons don't hit girls because they're weaker and they need you to defend them, we taught our children a few different things. We taught both our sons and our daughters that women are weaker. And that's not true, not even on a biological standpoint. On average, average does not mean even half, it just means average, right? An average can be like a quarter of the people. On average, men have greater upper body strength, muscular attachments in their upper body, and women have greater lower body strength or muscular attachments in their lower body. On average, women can handle pain, they can endure struggle longer than men can. They can do it without failure, like without it knocking them to their knees more than men can. So when we're looking at these things, we see that women are not in any way weaker than men, right? We see that the idea that the female, the biological female of our species being weaker than the biological male of our species is false. We also see that within the idea that the biological female within our species is weaker than the biological male within our species, a few different very toxic ideas for both biological sexes, right? First of all, we're totally ignoring intersex. We're totally ignoring that there's other biological sexes. We're totally ignoring gender, right? We're totally ignoring the fact that there are plenty of women out there who can kick a man's ass, any man's, any man's. One of my siblings growing up, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful Eastern Band Cherokee sibling, like my best friend growing up, right? Like I lived with her family for a while. Like her mother took care of me, like amazing human being, 5'10". That woman can knock any man on his hind end. Any man I've ever seen. We had wrestlers well over 6 foot who would step to her and she would take them. No fucking problem. None whatsoever. And in fact, we can see that the biological female not only can have the same upper body strength as the biological male, we also see that the biological female can be quicker than the biological male. We've all gotten in fights with that 5'5" dude or that 5'5" or 5'0" dude or that 5'0" girl. And well, they might not pack the punch that some 300-pound, 6'6" dude or girl can pack. They're able to take the punch, throw their own punches, and get out of the fucking way a lot faster. So, well, you could KO with one punch because you're 6 foot something with 300 pounds behind you and it's all muscle. They can get out of the way of that one punch and punch you 3 times before. you can reset yourself, right? So when we're looking at that, we have to understand that it just doesn't play like that. Teaching people that women are weaker and that men must defend them and men must not hit women also teaches people that women can do whatever the fuck they want without consequences. I don't know how many men I've known in my life who thought a woman could flat out deck them and there's nothing they should do in return. And that's horrific. The idea that a woman can abuse you and you have to stand there and take it because you're a man is horrific to your sense of boundaries, your sense of rights as a male, and my sense of boundaries and my sense of your rights as a female. And um, becomes very manipulative and kind of toxic, right? Um, and the idea that you need to protect and defend me and that I can't protect and defend myself can be very toxic as well. Myself, I'm a war vet. I've stood in front lines on stateside, right? I'll go toe to toe with anybody, right? Because I've been taken down enough in my life. I'm totally non-violent. I hate violence. I hate confrontation. But I've been taken down enough in my life that I can beat the shit out of anybody. And if I can't fucking stop you, at least I'll take a piece of you while I go, right? So the idea that I need somebody to protect and defend means that, like, I go into situations, I go to frontline, and I have males who might not think the best ways, who think that they need to stand in front of me while I'm frontlining, or they need to hover over me while I'm frontlining. And then I have males who are like, bitch know how to take care of herself. I'm going to stay back here. If she needs me, she knows where I'm at, right? Which gives me the autonomy that I deserve, right? And also shows that it gives me the strength to defend myself, right? Gives me the ability to defend myself and take care of myself, right? While having the backup when needed, right? So that idea and I'm not faulting you. This is something we've all been indoctrinated into. It just causes a lot of problems for us. It really causes a lot of pain in our society. It causes a lot of abuse within our society, and it causes a lot of self-flagellation within our society, like hating yourself within our society. Um, hey. So, Uncle Bud, there is what is called the out of Africa theory, and the out of Africa theory has been debunked. The idea that sapiens starts in Africa has not been debunked. Multi-regional theory is in play, yet it is not multi-regional theory of sapien, right? So the idea that everybody who is Homo sapien, except for those who are still within the borders of Africa, left Africa at 150,000 years, and we've isolated into separate communities over 150,000 years. And in that time of isolation, specific groups of us have advanced evolutionarily, evolved faster than other groups or evolved differently than other groups, is absolutely debunked and it's absolutely a myth. It's a very racist thought process, and it is used to double down on racism and used to double down on the racial structure, hierarchy thought process. It's very problematic. The idea that we all start in Africa as a species, our specific species, not the admixture species that we have within us, because we have like 7 admixture species that we have within us, not those species, but our species specifically. The idea that our species starts in Africa is still there. Our current understanding is that we start roughly 300,000 years ago, though we don't solidify as a singular species until 135,000 years ago, which you will notice already is wrong with the out of Africa myth that tells us that we left Africa by 150,000 years ago. And we see that It solidifies at 135 to 125,000 years ago as a species. And it also comes from what has prior been a theoretical method of speciation, and that is speciation through convergence of multiple species. And so we found out within the last 6 months that our species comes out of a convergence of many different of the subspecies of Homo erectus. Half of paleoanthropology calls these subspecies of Homo erectus, and the other half of paleoanthropology calls these separate species. We come out of convergence of these species like Antecessor, Ergaster, Heidelbergensis. So that convergence happens in Africa. So us all coming from Africa has not been debunked and is not a myth as our species. The understanding that there is what is called multi-regional theory, which is Neanderthals develop in Europe and Denisovan develops in Asia, and the ghost species within Turtle Island and Abayalian indigenous people develops here. And the ghost species within indigenous Australians develops in Australia. And the ghost species within Kwe people or San people and Oyo people in Africa, the only two species that don't are the only two communities that don't have Neanderthal DNA are the Kwe people and the Oyo people. And those two communities actually have 3 ghost species DNA within them. All of these different species that we see within our DNA are supportive of the multi-regional theory, which is that Homo erectus leaving Africa at 2 million years ago creates different species in different spaces across the globe because Homo erectus makes it to every corner of our globe. And since they create different species in many different regions across the globe, the many different species that they create in many different regions is multi-regional theory. And all of those species, well, not all of those, many of those species have admixture in us. They created us. They contribute to our DNA currently today. And so we do see that sapien, what is all of us, because we are all sapien, even though we all have a little bit of admixture from something else. There's no more than I think 7% in total. Like you might have 5% Denisovan and 1% Neanderthal and 1% ghost species in indigenous Australians, right? You have 0.02 to 0.03% Denisovan and 1 to 2% Neanderthal, and then a percentage of the ghost species within Turtle Island indigenous and Abayalian indigenous peoples that's still like under 5%. So we do have admixture from other species, yet that admixture doesn't change us from all being Homo sapien, and the species Homo sapien absolutely develops in Africa. I don't, Ami, unfortunately. I can see if I can. Are you talking about like the ghost populations within them, or specifically about the Yoruba population within the Oyo? So I was told Oyo, or that's the articles that I've read. Oyo may be a slur, and it is. I would appreciate correction, absolutely. Like I know that I was using what Western people call this Kwe people, the full name there, or the full Western name there, which is a slur because it's a perversion of what their name is, right? Ghost species are species that we see a fingerprint of them in our DNA, kind of like we see a fingerprint of Neanderthal and Denisovan in our DNA, like just a couple of strands, just a couple of genetics coming from them. Yet we haven't found them in the fossil record, so we don't have a full genome of them, so we call them a ghost species. We see just an imprint of them. We see, currently to my knowledge, 5 within sapien, 1 within Neanderthal and Denisovan, and then there is a possibility of a 7th ghost species that came out in an article talking about the 7th other human 3,000 years ago in East Asia, in East Eurasia. So Yoruba might be the better way to put it, and I was reading it as the Oyo in an article. So the reason that I'm using Oyo is I was taught within school that it was the 2 populations within Africa. I could not remember what the secondary population. I knew that it was the Kwe people, but I did not remember what the secondary population was. And then I found an article recently that went over and it said Oyo. So Yoruba is correct, I would say then. I would think. I'm asking, I guess, maybe. Is Yoruba more correct? Because Oyo is just a specific space within, or a specific community within the Yoruba people. I always liked, if I'm wrong on it, I want to be better about it, right? I always want to make sure that I'm saying it better. That's awesome. I would love to hear that. So my understanding then is it's probably the Yoruba peoples, um, and not just the Oyo community. Yeah. Okay. So um, it might be that the article. So even the article with the that I found that was talking about ghost species within the Kwe people, the article referred to them as the Khoisan, still right, and it also was referring to specific groups within the Kwe people, but I know that it's within the entirety of the group. So I think that the articles that I found were referring to. I don't remember if they were referring to the Casa or if they were referring to Bantu. They might have been referring to the Bantu, which I'm not sure if Bantu is the correct word or the best word. So even those articles were referring to a specific community within. And if Oyo is the historical empire or one of the historical empires, it might be that that's what they were talking, or the way that they were phrasing it within the article, as talking to members of that community specifically. But it would be, to my understanding, within the entirety of the Yoruba community, just like to my understanding it is within the entirety of the Kwe people, just like to my understanding it is within the entirety of Turtle Island and Abayalians and the entirety of Indigenous Australians when we see those ghost species. We see those ghost species. Now, of course, within Turtle Island, we don't have a lot of DNA for a lot of Indigenous people within Turtle Island, and this is because of the history of government treatment of people within Turtle Island and medicine treatment within Turtle Island, right? So we don't have a lot of DNA of Turtle Island Indigenous people. So we might not have, so we don't have an understanding of every Turtle Island Indigenous person's DNA, right? So my understanding of it, though, is that we see within Indigenous Turtle Islanders and Indigenous Bialians the presence of that ghost species. It's one of the ways that in pre-contact finds we can tell different things. So my understanding is the same within the Yoruba and within the Kwe. That makes sense. My topics today are the ones on the wall behind me. We were talking about sacred gender, and we were talking more currently about what we see with gender within the timeline of us as human. So we had just left off on the fact that recent studies have proven that in hunter-gatherer communities, that hunter-gatherers are more likely to be doing hunting than gathering, that the dietary needs are all met by hunting because you can get the rudiment from the stomach that gives you the vegetation dietary need that you need. And so the newer understanding is that it was not just men hunting and women gathering, but that the entire community would go to hunt. Now we see this translate down in indigenous communities when Turtle Island was invaded, right? We see that many indigenous communities when Turtle Island was invaded were living in a space where the women were going out hunting as much as the men were, right? That it was an entire group that would go to hunt, that the entire group might follow the buffalo, that the entire group might go on these big hunting parties or these big salmon parties, right? And that it was everybody. It wasn't just one specific gender. So the idea that gender role is playing a role within society, not only within the timeline of us as a human prior to written word, is really false. We also see that even within early written word, the idea that gender plays a role in society is really not there. We do see early things that do show gender. We see that Hammurabi's code absolutely shows gender, and there is specifics of gender within Hammurabi's code. Yet we also see that many societies don't treat gender the same, right? So when we look at, and I say this often, we see that there are several queens on the ancient rules of kings, right? There are queens in their own right, that they rule in their own right, and they don't rule because their father died, or they rule because their father died, absolutely, but they don't rule because their brother died, or rule and they were the only one left, right? They rule because they have the right of rule. We see that our earliest author was female. We see that when we're looking at archaeological finds throughout the course of our timeline, up until within the last couple of 100 years, maybe last 500 years, even. Um, well, no, let me take that back. In any space pre Christianization, we see that there are many more women in battle than there are previously thought, right? So we often like to think of all prior spaces and all prior communities as having the same gender diaphragm, or not diaphragmism, the same gender roles that we have, right? Yet when we look at prior communities, we see that the gender roles within prior communities are not cut and dried. There isn't necessarily a gender role. Somebody might fulfill what we today might think of as a typical gender role, yet it is not thought of as a typical gender role for them. It is thought of as what they want to do, what is important to them, right? Somebody might fulfill the role for a period of time. If I were to, if I fight in battles every day, yet I get pregnant and have a baby, I might sit out battles for a couple of years while I'm raising and nurturing that child until I can leave that child at home. And, if I pass, then that child is taken care of, right? So, we might see that people will fit into our perception of what a gender role is for a period of time and then go back to uh, something that would be opposite of our perception of gender roles, because there's not our perception of gender roles within that society, right? So we look at the Scythians and see that the Scythian warriors were female. We look at BJ 581, which is the grave that I study, that is the greatest warrior grave that we have ever found in the Scandinavian area. Tops out pretty much everything in Northwestern Europe. And we thought for 100 years that it was a male, our greatest general ever. He must have been high ranking, has an entire armory with them, and they're female biologically. So when we're looking through this, we see that within all of us is this concept of gender that did not exist prior. Good morning. And when we look at the fact that this concept of gender did not exist prior to it being placed within society, we can see where it starts to be placed within society, and we can see where it starts to influence society. And we can see where our concept of what those gender roles is actually changes throughout society. Now, when we're looking at these different places, for myself, the clear delineation to me is othering, city building stratification, right? And a specific timeline of history when religion starts to take over. So when we're looking at even prior to my knowledge currently of the oldest othering within society based on gender, which means the oldest, you are female and I am male, so I should rule, or I am female and you are male, so I should rule. The oldest of the idea that gender roles play a structure within society, to me, so far has come from the Greeks. We do see within Hammurabi's code that there are laws that apply specifically to women and specifically to men, though from my memory, most of those codes are about how men should be treating women and very much about women having rights. So it might show where people are starting to other women within society, and Hammurabi is trying to remind people that women have as much rights as men do, right? It could show a couple of different things, but that would be my take on it. Again, or not again, I do have to state that I haven't, like Hammurabi's code, I have a full copy of it. Um, ha ha, ha ha ha. This is what happens when you haven't completely finished your office and things are everywhere. So underneath something on my altar is the book that I've been looking for. But when we look at Hammurabi's code, we absolutely, to my memory, see that there is this idea that that autonomy exists for both genders. That your role in society isn't so much based on your gender as it is based on what you are doing within society. And then that when we see them deal with women versus men, it has to do with women being able to maintain life, even if the man around her is fucking with her, right? And so this to me doesn't necessitate gender roles. Um, it is about it's about maintaining equity, right? It's about ensuring that equity is maintained for all people within the society, that autonomy is maintained within the society more than it is gender roles. Now that doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that that doesn't that doesn't mean that there aren't gender roles within that society, right? So there might be some gender roles that we see within the society that center around things like childbearing or maintaining family lines, right? And yet, even within that, we might see that women are meant to bear children because that's what we physically do, right? Yet, that doesn't necessitate that their role is in the house. Or that their role within society outside the bearing of children is a specific thing, right? It doesn't necessitate that your role is to cook and clean. You might bear children, and yet you might also go to war, right? Like you might bear children, but you might also run a business, right? Um, we see that a lot of it has to do with marriage contracts, and we see that a lot of it has to do with slavery, and we see that a lot of it has to do with protection within the marriage contract. So we see that these contracts are valid, right? We also see things like if a prospective son-in-law entered the house of his prospective father-in-law, but his father-in-law later gave his daughter, the prospective bride, to another man, he, the father-in-law, shall return to him the rejected son-in-law twofold the amount of the bridal presents which he had brought. Something like this tells us that men are coming into the family, not women. That a man is coming and moving into his bride's house and becoming a member of his bride's household. The bride is not moving into the man's household and becoming a member of the man's household, which tells us of matrilineal descent. This is the laws of Ur-Nammu, not Hammurabi. Here's Hammurabi code. And a lot of these within Hammurabi's code are very much about, making sure that men aren't harming people. I mean, like, here's 2 pages about, like, uh, how they need to behave towards their wives. If a seigneur was taken captive and there was not significant to live on in his house, his wife may enter the house of another with that woman incurring no blame at all. Uh, if the seigneur has made up his mind to divorce a lay priestess, the exact meaning of the word used here, sugi tum, is unknown, but it indicates some sort of priestess who bore him children, or Hayardul, who provided him with children. They shall return her dowry to that woman and also give her half of the field, orchard, and goods in order that she may rear her children. After she has brought up her children from whatever was given to her children, they shall give her a portion corresponding to that of an individual heir in order that the man of her choice may marry her. So this makes sure that women are owning property. This makes sure that women are seen on an equal value in an equal lane, right? So when we're looking at these things, we're not seeing so much this setting of gender rules within society. We're seeing that within the society, we're seeing um, setting of laws to ensure equality, to ensure equity, to ensure stability. Not you're a woman, I'm a man, right? Um, you see, if a seigneur's wife has brought about the death of her husband because of another man, they shall impale that woman on the stakes. If a seigneur has intercourse with his daughter, they shall make that seigneur leave the city. So you see that these are about inflicting harm on another. They're not about inflicting a gender role. When we get closer to our timeline, we see that gender roles are starting to solidify. Much of this comes about after Rome and after Christianity becomes a state religion. And the reasons that much of this comes about after Rome and the Christianity becoming a state religion, Rome really doubles down on the idea that women are property, for lack of a better term. Rome really puts women almost in a slave class within their city. Rome is populated mainly by slaves, anyways. They have a large slave population. Their slave population is any area that they have conquered. They get slaves from that area, they bring them home to Rome. Roman citizens have to be Italian of birth. Many the encompassed nations, you can have like half citizenry, but not a full citizenry, even as a man. And women have very few rights. Now, women do have rights within Rome. You absolutely see that there are laws put in place within Rome to protect women. You also see that there is this understanding within these laws. You can see that these laws put into place to protect women are very much, she can inherit, but she has to she's not going to inherit the main portion. And if she inherits and then she marries, like it goes underneath her spouse's control, she gets part of it back if her spouse died, like just different things within it, that there is this solidifying of gender roles. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that the Romans are very much on procreation, and yet they're in a timeline and a way that they're doing their medicine where and they're ignoring women so much that procreation is deadly. So there's actually like stimulus packages that would happen for women who had a certain amount of children. If you had over 3 children, 3 live births, then you would get like a stimulus package. If you had 4, like you were considered like a matriarch of Rome, like you became like top notch, like you in the hierarchy structure, you go high. You're a mother of Rome. You have contributed 4 children to Roman citizenry. So we see that there is a lot put on the having of children, right? And the raising of children for women and the running of a household for women. And this is where we really get these ideas. A lot of this has to do with just the way that Rome works. A lot of it has to do that with the fact that Rome is really taking on the Athenian thought process. And in the Athenian thought process, the Athenian Greeks, there is less of a role for women within that thought process. There is more of a subservient role for women within those thought processes. And so Rome idolizing the Greeks, and the Athenian Greeks specifically, takes this and doubles down on it. When Christianity starts, most people don't know that most of the early Christians were women. Women and slaves were the early Christians for the most part. And early Christianity was actually very egalitarian and equitable. Early Christianity isn't Christianity, it's Judaism. It is a man who was trying to get his people to understand what he was, his people had strayed and he was trying to bring them back. And then when it gets translated, it mainly gets translated to early Romans, and it mainly gets translated to early Roman slaves. I'm sure it starts with those coming from Jerusalem. And then it gets translated to the early Roman matrons, the early Roman women. And so we have many of the early Christian saints are actually Roman women who became Christian and were martyred for it. right? Because the Christians are absolutely, for about a couple 100-year period, killed by the Romans. Of course, that doesn't give you the right to go and kill everybody else for 2,000 years. Yet, we do see that we've always been martyrs coming up frequently when they start to argue. So when we see the Christianization of the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire makes Christianity that state religion, that really doubles down on the role of women within the Roman Empire. We see as the Romans are interacting with other empires, that the Romans don't really understand that other empires have women who lead. Boudica, the queen of the Iceni, is one of these examples where the tribal lineage and the leadership was Boudica's through right. And they gave it to her husband. And then when her husband died, it was supposed to revert to her because it was supposed to go to her daughters. And instead of it reverting to her, the Romans came in and attacked and gang raped her preteen daughters and whipped her publicly. And so she went to war. This was all because the Romans decided that she didn't have the right to rule her people, even though her people had designated her as their ruler, that her family lines, that she was the natural ruler of her space. So when we're looking at this, we see Rome not really understanding that concept when they go into different spaces. We see Perpetua, that was actually the martyr that I was thinking her, and there's another one that starts with a P, but yeah. When we see Rome moving into these spaces, when we see this translation of the way spaces have to and communities have to think, right? And they see the gender roles starting to shift. I wish Rome would have left everybody alone. Their civilization was not civilized. There was nothing civilized about it. I doubt we would have had the Huns or even the Mongols if Rome had not decided to conquer the entire world, right? The Huns and the Mongols are both reactionary to what Rome did, right? So absolutely, I wish that, right? Absolutely. So when we're looking at this gender role developing, we absolutely see that there's this gender role developing of the idea that women are weaker, that women belong in the home, that it is women who have this gender role. At the same time, we see another gender role developing. And at the same time, we see this monolithic thought process of gender developing, right? We see this idea that biological sex that is visual to everybody else is paramount to self-understanding, to what actually might be your biological sex, to self-development, to anything else about you. What somebody views your biology, their view of your biology matters more than everything else. And this shift of their view of your biology, categorizing you, putting you in a space and it becoming a monolith within that space. And we've talked about many times, monolith doesn't happen. Nothing is monolithic. And the idea that we're supposed to achieve this monolithism, this monolith of gender, this monolith of society, this monolith of culture, the idea that any of these things can be monolithic is illogical at best and willfully ignorant at worst. So when we're looking at the way these gender roles play out within this, we can absolutely see this kind of switching into a place where gender roles exist and gender roles are monolithic based on perceived gender. Um, and it, and I want to state this based on perceived gender, not on biological sex. Thank you. Because the biological sex at this point is only a perception, right? You can't designate most biological sexes based on that perception at that time as absolutely being that biological sex, when we know that there are three biological sexes now: male, female, and intersex. And we have seen the presence of intersex in the archaeological records during Roman times and during pre-Roman times, right? So because of that, we must understand that this is a perception of gender based on a perception of biological sex. And these perceptions are often faulty. These perceptions are often false, right? And so this idea that you must monolithize into a perceived gender role really starts about this time. We see that it's in specific spaces, right? We see that some spaces carry on their different ideas of what gender is and what gender roles are much later than other spaces. Again, this has to do with the Christianization of the Roman space and the conquering of the Roman space, and then the Christianization of other spaces as they are conquered by the descendant nations of the Roman nation, because there are nations that are basically descendants of the Romans, right? The Romans are kind of a descendant nation of the Greeks, and Great Britain is a descendant nation of the Romans, right? The U.S. is a descendant nation of the Romans. It is nations based on the Roman ideals, right? And so when we're looking at these descendant nations, we see that this gender role pervades these descendant nations. When we're seeing that the gender role idea and concept starts pervading these descendant nations, we see that it starts eradicating all understandings. I talked a little bit before about the fact that many of the things that we see that we consider to be female today actually start out as male. Um, Pink starts out as a male color. Lace and velvet are both male. In fact, they're male royalty to start with, right? Got to be pretty high up on the royal male ladder to have those things. Same thing with purple. Same thing with makeup. Same thing with heels. Heels are created initially to make men feel tall, right? Man, all the girls are taller than me. I need a couple extra inches, right? So heels are initially a male thing. We actually develop stirrups after we develop heels, but they become very helpful in that. If you don't know and you haven't, used stirrups, heels are a priority with stirrups. We absolutely see that women and men both wore dresses up until probably, I think it's 1300, right? 1400. I think it's 1400, like up until 1400, I think through the 1300s, through the 14th century, through the 1300s, men are still wearing dresses for the most part. And at this point, it's long tunics, is what they're calling them. A tunic. A tunic is just a long shirt, but it's also a dress, right? A short dress or a long dress. Sometimes they're wearing ankle length tunics, right? Or knee length tunics. They might wear hose underneath them, yet hose are usually just leggings, right? They just go on your legs. You might have like a pair of drawers underneath, like a pair of underwear underneath that you tuck into your hose, depending on your station, depending on who you are, right? But we're seeing long tunics for both men and women. So dresses are initially both male and female. When we're looking at this, we see that, before the kilt even comes into play, that males of the Celtic society are wearing long tunics down to their knees, right? And in fact, they continue to wear those long tunics after the kilt comes into play. They just put the kilt over it and kind of blouse it up a bit. So underneath that kilt is a tunic that probably goes down to his knees, right? So we see that as gender starts to become set within society, our idea of what entails those genders is different. And our idea of what entails these gender roles within society shifts, uh, not necessarily what we consider mindsets of masculine and feminine, but what we consider the outside accoutrements of masculinity and femininity. My YouTube is at Enwita Ord. Same spelling as this channel. You can also go to the enwitaord.com site in my bio on TikTok and click at the bottom of that main page. And it has a YouTube, my channel at the bottom of that main page. I think I need to do some edits to the main page. It might have the wrong time of lives and stuff like that on that, just so you know. It's just Enwood or no spaces. Well, I mean, it might like the at has no spaces, but the title has spaces. I'm technologically inept, so I really couldn't say too much. But and again, in the website in my bio, the enwitaord.com website in my bio, at the bottom of the page, let me go to the right. It should be at the bottom of the very main page. It should have both my YouTube and my TikTok, as in you click on it and it'll take you to my YouTube or my TikTok, so that you can actually, yes, I go live a few times a week on both TikTok and YouTube, and you can click on the YouTube and not get anything. Fuck the fuck off. Hold on, I can fix that really quick while we're sitting here. Maybe. Watch me, watch me, watch me. I don't know if you're talking to me, Anthony, but I don't know what that word is. I know how to do this, but I can't figure it out. I know how to do this if I could just figure it out. Listen, this is not my shit. He's not good at this stuff. Maybe I can do it that way. Did I still have that one up? Yes. Okay, so if you type at Nwida Ord or just Nwida Ord into your YouTube, it should pop up with my channel on YouTube. I will update the website so that you can click on it, but I can't do it right now because I can't figure it out right now, but I will get to it and make sure that I do it because technologically I figured out how to put words on pictures and put them behind my head. That's how I'm at technologically. Figured out how to put words on pictures and put them behind my head. So when we're looking at the way that gender roles fit, we see that gender roles really get changed a lot, and that gender doesn't, it's new, it's recent. We see that there's actually documentation of the first transitioning surgery in the late 1800s. Like the idea that only two genders exist is so very new. And it's really only within specific groups of people, right? It's really only for them to be able to have a rhetoric and a propaganda that they can speak to that gives them the ability to double down on their issues, right? It's not something that we've really had a whole lot of throughout society. All of that is the back. What I want to talk about is sacred gender. And what I want to talk about with sacred gender is the fact that sacred gender has no roles. We like to think of sacred masculinity and sacred femininity as being roles, right? We like to think of gender as having roles, right? We like to think of this idea of gender and biological sex being the same thing. We have this perception in our head, especially within the United States, of all of these things not being able to coexist, that there can't be different ideas, that there's only one thing. And because we have this idea of what is masculine versus what is feminine, which is a skewed idea of what is masculine and what is feminine. Again, when we look at our history of what is considered masculine and what is considered feminine, if we look at our prehistory of what is considered masculine, and what is considered feminine, when we look at these things, we absolutely see that they're shifting. They're always shifting, right? So our current idea of what is masculine and what is feminine is really off, right? And when we look at the fact that our current idea of what is masculine and what is feminine is really off, and we look at the fact that within society, we have this idea that we have to fit into roles, right? Like every single one of us believe that we have, or have at one point in our life believed that we have a role that we're supposed to fit in, whether it's I have the role of a male or the role of a female, or whether I have the role of a teacher or the role of a child or the role of a parent or the role of a this or the role of a that. It's all a role. And we all believe that we have to play them to somebody else's standards, that we have to fit into it to somebody else's standards, that our idea of what that role is only half as important as everybody else's idea of what that role is. And this translates from parenting to being a child to being a student to being a worker to being a boss to being a it doesn't matter what it is. There is this perception that it is a role that you are supposed to embody in an abstract perfection, right? Made up idea of perfection, and that it's very monolithic. All parents are supposed to behave this way. All students are supposed to behave this way. All teachers are supposed to behave this way. All bosses are supposed to behave this way. There is this very monolithic idea of what these rules provide and what they're supposed to do. And this idea that we all must fit into one. We all must, and we must fit into one with no deviation, right? So if my role is as a woman, if my role in society is as a woman, and that role in society means that I'm supposed to be a housewife and I'm supposed to take care of my children and I'm supposed to cook and clean for my husband, right? If that's my role within society, there isn't a deviation of what that thought process is. Where we do see deviations, like we now believe that it's okay for women to go out and work, which, duh. But where we do see those deviations, we see even within those deviations that A, you get an add on, nothing's taken away. All your role is still there. You get something added into the pile, right? And B, you still have to fit all these other parts of this role perfectly within somebody else's monolithic idea of what that perfection is, right? Um, and there is this idea that you can be multiple roles at once. And yet, within that idea of being multiple roles at once, you still must fit the monolithic perfection within this role and this role. And if you slide on the monolithic perfection within this role or slide on the monolithic perfection within this role, you're failing, right? So we have this role-based society, and it's not turn-based like die 20 roll. We have this role-based society, and in this role-based society, gender role happens. So we have this idea of what your gender role is within society. And our gender role ideal within society is that women are the nurturers, women are the bearers of the children, women take care of the house, they take care of the husband, they take care of the everybody. They are the nurturing, giving of the society. Men are the protectors and the providers of the society. And to specify what protection and provision means, because it is a very specific role of provision and very specific role of protection, right? It is not just like the very specific role of nurturing, right? So the very specific role of nurturing within women is I should be able to clean for you and cook for you and diaper and nurse, right? This is very specific nurture roles. There is not the idea that nurture is not just those things, that there are very many ways that we nurture each other, right? There's not the understanding that nurture is also interaction, right? Nurture is nurturing somebody's creativity, nurturing somebody's emotions, right? There is not that understanding of nurture. We're starting to get some of that understanding of nurture, but there's still not that understanding of nurture so much. And our idea of what a woman's role in nurturing and what nurturing is to a woman is very much I should cook and I should clean and I should take care of the kids, right? That and very basics and those things, right? And that to nurture my husband, a meal should be provided for him. And I should make sure that when he comes home from work, that his hard day outside the house, seeing adults and working and, whatever his job is definitely not as hard or definitely is harder than my job at home. And so I should put aside everything and focus on nurturing him, right? Which is still very prevalent within our society. And our idea of what provision is for men, what providing and protection is for men, is very narrow. Provision for men is I must have a job that earns enough money to support my wife and my children. That's it. My provision as a male is money. That's it. My protection as a male is to make sure that you're protected from other men. That's it, right? So when we're looking at these things as our gender roles and we're teaching men that they have no nurturing ability, which is completely false when we look at the biological uh, makeup of humanity, men are nurturers. Um, so when we tell men that their only job is to provide a monetary base, not even the house. So, like, we teach that men provide the money and they pay their rent, but the house is hers to take care of and hers to do everything within, from decoration to maintenance. Now, we might teach that men should do plumbing more than women should do plumbing, right? But we don't teach that men have any role in cleaning. We don't teach that men have any role in nurturing the children, right? He provided a paycheck, and that is his role, is to provide a paycheck, right? Um, and to protect, right? We don't teach women we don't teach that the nurturing that women are doing is providing, right? And if we were teaching that the nurturing that is being given is provision, and teaching men that part of their provision is nurture, we can see where this can very much increase the health of our children, very much increase the health of our men, right? If your biological drive is to nurture the next generation, which is what our biological drive is, it is not pump, pump, dump, and walk away. Creating a baby does nothing to continue our species because we have 5 life stages from neonate to adult. So we must have community to nurture our children. So if you have a biological drive to nurture your community, and you're being told that the only thing that you're allowed to do is work a job to provide, and that's how it's positive, or that's the positive way for you to behave, you're missing that nurture, right? um, it is nurturing to provide money, right? Yet it is also nurturing to cook a meal. It's also nurturing to listen to your children. It's also nurturing to color with them, right? It's also nurturing to go on a walk and inspire, right? It's also nurturing to talk about the hard things, right? These are all methods of nurture that we're skipping, both as women who are supposed to be nurturing and as men who are only supposed to be providing. Both those things are interchangeable. Nurturing and provision are interchangeable. You can't nurture without having provision, and you can't give provision without nurture, right? And provision is nurturing, and nurturing is provision, right? So when we disconnect provision and nurturing, we sink into this space where we've disconnected a part of our soul from what we're doing in our daily life. For women, this can translate very much into self-worth problems. My only self-worth is to give birth, and to, essentially sometimes be somebody's 24/7 whatever, right? Um, my ex-husband used to say, I'm not the bitch, you're the bitch. Because his dad would tell him, I'm not the bitch in the house, you're the bitch in the house, so you get to do the shit. Okay, and so he would say the same thing to me. This is bitch work. I don't do bitch work. You're the bitch. So we get this idea that it is a woman's job to cook and clean, right? And in this idea that, how many men I've known in my life that actually enjoy cooking. Like, my father loves to cook. My dad loves to cook. My first husband, both of his parents were cooks and he loved to cook. He didn't have a lot of memories from his childhood from his father who had died when he was a child. But one of them was that he would go to his father's restaurant and his father would sit him up on the counter in his restaurant where he was the head chef and he would go over all the cooking stuff. And his mother at that point was working as a chef in the local jail. And so she had all of these different chefing ideas. And so I learned a lot of recipes from him, right? I learned a lot of my today dishes that I still use 25 years later from him. My second husband, that was the one thing in the house that he would occasionally do. Like he didn't do it all the time, maybe once a month, but he loved to cook, right? So he is taught that his provision, that's always nasty. He is taught that his provision is to provide the money to pay the bills, but he enjoys cooking. So he's taught that that's not part of providing. But if he was taught that cooking was part of providing, then he's doing something that he enjoys doing and he's fulfilling the role that he's told that he's supposed to fulfill, right? So when we're looking at things like this, we see that by being set in this very narrow monolithic idea of what it is that you're supposed to be doing and you're supposed to be being, this very narrow monolithic idea of what you're supposed to be doing and you're supposed to be being very much harms all the people on the scale. Not only does it harm the woman who is being abused in the home because she's supposed to be doing everything and providing all the nurture, all the care, all the everything, and is not doing enough ever because that's usually how that goes. And all he's doing is bringing in a paycheck, right? Not only does it harm her in the fact that she doesn't have a life outside of that, right? It harms him in the fact that he doesn't have a life outside of the money, right? His worth is wrapped up in his paycheck instead of how he interacts, instead of hugging his children. His worth is wrapped up in a paycheck. And when we wrap our worth up in what we're exploitable for, our worth changes by societal standards, right? Our worth is society's whim. So if my worth is only in my worth is only in being a tall, brown-haired person with a vagina, and tomorrow all of society like short, blonde-haired persons with vaginas, my worth shifts on society's whim, right? So if your worth is entirely wrapped up in whether or not you cook for your family every night or whether or not you work every day, and one of those things shifts, whether or not society decides that we're no longer working every day, right? Maybe we're moving towards what we've been supposed to be moving towards, a 15-day work week or a 15-hour work week, or universal basic income or things like that. So maybe there's a shift in the way that we work, right? So now my self-worth starts disintegrating because I am now having to shift what my self-worth is. If we instead understand that our self-worth is based on presence, being here, right? Then we understand that our self-worth is based on existence, right? And that's not something that can shift, right? So when we are looking at what is sacred with gender, what we must understand is that there are not sacred masculinity and sacred femininity look the same. Because sacred masculinity and sacred femininity is about nurturing the next generation and each other. It's about community. And it's about inspiring that creativity, nurturing that creativity within all of us, right? So there isn't a sacred masculine and a sacred feminine. There is sacred within gender. Now, we can have expressions of masculinity and femininity based on what our internal thought processes are, or like our internal feelings. So I've talked before, I'm two-spirit. This means that I embody both genders. For me, roughly 60% of the time I embody the female gender, and roughly 40% of the time I embody the male gender. For me, You probably won't be able to perceive it. I perceive it within my body. I feel it. My body feels differently depending on what gender my body feels. And when we're looking at those things, we see that one can distinguish within their physical being different feelings of gender. This is why we can absolutely say my pronouns are he, him, right? Like a man can absolutely say my pronouns are he, him because I feel he, him. I can state that my pronouns are she, he, and we because I feel she, he, and we, right? So when I feel masculine, those feelings might come across as maybe being more active. Um, though, I mean, again, we must understand that nothing is monolithic. And just because we perceive it as being, just because I perceive it as a masculine feeling within myself does not mean that you perceive it as a masculine feeling within yourself, right? So if my thought process of my personal masculinity is I'm more confident as a male. I feel safer as a male, right? And a lot of this is because men can hurt people a lot. Like I have a lot of trauma surrounding being harmed by men, right? And so when I am perceived as being feminine, a lot of that harm can be perpetuated. Yet if I am perceived as not being feminine, then some of that harm perpetuation kind of goes away. I feel less like I'm going to be attacked. So if my body is perceptibly male to my mind, there's a shift in the way I carry myself, right? And I try to make sure that I shift this way other times too, because I recognize what it does for the body to shift the way we carry ourselves. Um, but my shift might carry, like I was telling my father, my biological father, who I met in 2020, I went back in May for my youngest brother's funeral. And when I was there, I was talking to my father. This is like maybe the third time we've actually had a chance to sit face to face. And we were talking, and my father is an old Boilermaker, and he has always been loud and obnoxious to everything I've heard. And he talks over people, which I get from him, and he has all the information. He's really smart, but, most people don't view him that way. And he feels that most people don't view him that way. And we're talking, and we were talking about an incident that had happened where he was angry with my brother and he was yelling at me. And I had told him, you don't get to yell at me like that. Nobody yells at me like that. And if you can't not yell at me like that, you need to leave my fucking space. And that had ended our conversation for a year. And as we're talking, I'm interacting with him and we're talking about this situation. And I'm like, you're telling me that I have to listen to you. You're just some fucking old dude. You don't fucking realize you see a girl, but I'm not a girl. I'm a fucking dude and I've earned my lots. I've earned my stripes, right? And in this moment, my entire perception of my body shifts and my entire way of carrying myself shifts. I'd never do this typically, right? But here I am expressing this masculine part of me, and this confidence, this shift in the way I carry myself comes out. Okay. I've earned the right? So when we are looking at sacred masculine versus sacred feminine within gender role, we have to understand that it is never about somebody else's perception of what is masculine and what is feminine. It is about our perception of our masculinity, right? Things that are not sacred are a lot easier to describe than things that are sacred, other than it is sacred to be nurturing of everybody around you. Everybody around you. And nurturing means everything, right? So, like, my partner will bring me home a Red Bull in the morning sometimes because I drink Red Bulls usually, right? I was doing coffee, it makes my stomach upset. So I've been doing energy drinks. If I don't get my caffeine, I get a headache, right? So that's nurturing. My partner knows I hate to cook, right? I was the perfect housewife for decades and it hurt me. And so I'm like, fuck this. I'm not fuck it, right? I love my partner. So I've started cooking for them because I know they love my food, right? And I don't like to cook, but I love to cook for them because it's nurturing them. and they have in return nurtured my cooking by not ever making me do it, right? And telling me how much they appreciate it and making sure I have all the tools that I need for it, right? So they're nurturing these things within me without pushing me to do them, right? So this is ways that my partner is capable of nurturing me and nurturing me to grow so that I can nurture them in return, right? So when we're looking at nurture is so many different things. Nurture is reading with a child or coloring with a child. Nurture is taking a walk in nature and talking about the different things with somebody, right? Nurturing is sitting on the couch together playing video games with, cuddled up and talking about the video games. Nurturing is connection. Nurturing is encouraging or nurturing um, a person's self-worth and self-development, right? Um, and it's never my partner's responsibility to affect my feelings. They can affect my feelings, but it's not their responsibility to be cautious of affecting my feelings in those ways. Sometimes I worry that my partner is too cautious of affecting my feelings and that it changes their own interactions in ways that isn't the best way, right? Like I worry that I've created that, right? Um, when we are nurturing somebody, we're providing this stable base. We're curious about who they are, and we uplift their own ideas. We don't change them. We don't try and create them into something else. We don't control them. Protection isn't about control, right? To protect you, I don't need to tell you what to fucking do. I just need to make sure that if you need me, I'm there, right? So when we're looking at nurture, nurture is very much broad scale. It is connection with somebody and ensuring that you are, for lack of a better term, nurturing who they are, right? So, like when we look at nurturing a plant, right, we make sure that it has the best soil and maybe we put some plant food in there and we water it, right? This is the nurturing of a plant to grow. Um, when we nurture our animals, we might make sure that they have enough food and water and that they go outside on a regular basis if that's what they need, or that their litter box is clean, or that their cage is clean. And then we give them interaction, right? We play with them, we brush them, we pet them, we cuddle with them, we give them interaction. These are nurturing things. Our children must have physical contact and they must have mental stimulation. And any disconnect of the parents from that physical contact and that mental stimulation will cause failure to thrive, which will kill a child. And so nurture is about giving the needs, ensuring that the needs are met, right? And not just the bare minimum of the needs are met, but the needs are met fully. That is what nurturing is. Because when somebody can nurture me, I can grow. I cut contact with a couple of narcissists in my life. And I have a partner who is constantly bought me a camera for Christmas last year because he knew I was doing videos. And he's like, oh, this will work for them, right? He's constantly doing what he can to make sure that my interests are being uplifted, right? And that I'm reminded that I can do things. Not that he's like, did you do that? But he's like, God, you're really amazing at this, right? So because of that, I was able to publish 2 books, right? Um, 45 years old, and 45 is when or 44 is when I start publishing, right? And this is very much because of the fact that I had a couple narcissists in my life and didn't have any nurture in my life, right? So I didn't have any faith in myself. He didn't help me write the books. He didn't help me create the TikTok account. He's not even on TikTok, right? He didn't help me do any of these things, but he provided the stable, nurturing base for me to do these things. And when my mind is exploding and I can't function, he's there to hold me or to listen to me without fixing it or to, interact. This is nurturing me to grow without controlling the way I grow, right? So this is a very sacred gender role, and it is our sacred gender embodiment, and it is a sacred and gender embodiment for both males and females. Now, one of the things that my partner likes to do as a cishet male is go to the gym. I have a child that's been wanting to go to the gym for years. His father isn't going to take him to the gym because that's just not what his father does. And I am not a gym person either. So a connection for them in a way that he's nurturing my child and in turn nurturing me is going to the gym with my child. This is one of my male children. This is a male child who is very masculine in his embodiment of who he is as a male. He views himself as very male. And so they're doing something that is considered very masculine together. Now, that doesn't mean that women don't go to the gym. Women go to the gym all the fucking time. Don't get me wrong. I've known some fucking badass bodybuilders that were women, right? So don't get me wrong on that. This is something that they both enjoy doing, though, that is a very masculine thing within them, and they view it in a masculine way. They view it as a masculine part of who they are, right? Now, that doesn't mean that either of them think that women can't. For them, it is an expression of a part of their masculinity. Specifically for my son, it's an expression of the fact that he would have been a warrior, period. He's already a warrior, but he would have been a warrior. Boy from a year old liked to do sword fighting, could die beautifully. He's always been, he did boxing specifically because he wanted to take the hit and give the hit. Like he has that very, I don't think of it as aggression. I think of it as active, as physical need of activity, right? And his expression of his physical need of activity is very what we would consider to be masculine. So, expressing that physical need of activity that he considers to be a masculine part of him, or that society might consider to be a masculine part, in a positive way, my partner nurturing in my son that physical need of activity, which is something that my partner also has. My partner did MMA for years and has championship titles and all that sort of stuff, and always very active and always very gym orientated, right? So he is nurturing within a child that activity that child wants, that they both share, that they both view as part of the masculinity that they are. They both want the muscles, they both want the strength, right? So this is sacred masculinity. This is that masculine part of him nurturing that masculine part of my child. Now, it could be nurturing a feminine part in a child too. He can be a masculine, being nurturing as a masculine person, and being, he has a child that when we met was trans, is no longer trans. He nurtured that within them, right? So he was able to nurture both the sacred masculinity within that child when that child needed that sacred masculinity nurtured, and the sacred femininity within that child when that child decided that they no longer needed the sacred masculinity nurtured. And both of those things he was able to do in his own perception of self, right? His own perception of who he is, which is his masculinity, right? Which is the embodiment of what he feels as that human being, right? The embodiment of his gender, the embodiment of his self. So we can see that you don't have to like nurture the same gender, yet you nurture, that it's about nurturing, right? That it's about, it's about, I was listening to a book that one of the creators on here, who is detribalized from south of the border, maybe they're north of the border now, but a detribalized individual was reading a book based on, I think it's Mesoamerica, but I can't remember exactly where. And in this, it was describing groups of people or a community. And when it was describing this community, it was talking about they constantly are learning. They're constantly learning something new. One of the major parts about it is major parts of value and worth within the community is learning constantly something new, constantly learning, satisfying that quest for knowledge. So when we are looking at us and we are looking at children, we are looking at everybody within the world, that quest for knowledge is really huge and paramount. So when we're nurturing that creativity within somebody, when we're nurturing that quest for knowledge within somebody, when we are nurturing is their ability to find themselves. What we are nurturing is that ability to find what sings to them. What we are nurturing is that ability for them to do the thing that they're going to be the best at. We are the best at things that sing to us. When something sings to our heart, when it sings to our soul, when it feels natural and right, those are the things that we grow the most in, we learn the most of, we're the best at, right? That sing to us. And so when you are nurturing a child to look into firefighting and look into Disney princesses and look into mermaids and look into astronauts and look into Bigfoot and look into paleoanthropology, what you're nurturing is that child's creativity through these different things so that they can decide what of those things sings to them so that they can get to that space, as opposed to, oh, you're going to be my little hay bucker or you're going to be my little veterinarian, right? As opposed to deciding what a child is going to be, you nurture them to find their own thought processes instead of giving them their own thought processes. This is something that, again, how you physically embody gender makes this, or not physically, how you perceive your own gender decides the sacred masculinity or the sacred femininity in it. So if I'm going to nurture through food, right? And I'm going to embody one gender over the other, right? Uh, the nurturing's not going to look that different from an outside perspective. It might feel different from an interior perspective, right? So if I am nurturing through food as the feminine side of me, I might enjoy it more, right? Whereas if I'm nurturing through food from the masculine side of me, I might feel a little bit less like I want to do this. Not necessarily like that, but like, just as a hypothetical. So, because personally, I just don't want to do it, period. But it might come out differently. When I cook, I have a tendency to put energy work into my food. And I do this by communicating with the food itself. And I do this by, like, I'll stir in certain ways, like counterclockwise and clockwise. Clockwise invokes and counterclockwise removes. And so, like, if I'm trying to cook for somebody who's in pain, I might stir counterclockwise and put a lot of thought process into removing the pain from their body, right? Or the negativity from their body, right? Um, so this might be the more feminine aspect of me in the way that I cook, right? In the more nurturing, or not in the way that I nurture, the more feminine aspect in the way that I nurture. Whereas when and that doesn't mean that that's masculine versus feminine. That can absolutely be something that somebody who's masculine feels, and that's the way they do it, right? Whereas when I am butchering, which I know women who can butcher better than any man, but when I am butchering to cook dinner, I might feel more masculine in the way that I am doing that, right? It might stir to a masculine side of me. Not necessarily, how I personally feel it, but as an example. So when we're looking at these things, we can see that there is sacred masculine and there is sacred feminine. Yet those things are embodied by you embodying sacredness and feeling masculine or feminine. They're not structures and outlines of what is masculine versus what is feminine. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't feminine things within us and masculine things within us, right? I know a lot of people that think that women are innately more submissive or more that women innately want a man who's strong enough to protect them, right? That there's this feeling of this biological need that he's going to protect us. And I mean, because I grew up with that thought process, I thought that process for a while, right? And yet I realize that, I mean, for me personally, like it just doesn't work that well because of being two spirit, right? When we're looking at the way these things are shifting, it might shift out differently as time goes along, right? So for somebody, in their 20s, a girl in their 20s, she might feel that having this strong man to take care of her makes her feel more weak, right? And for some women, in a world where they feel like they're made to uh, deny themselves for the sake of others, because some women are going to feel very connected to that idea of what their gender role is, right? So for some women, the idea of being what we currently perceive as ultra feminine is very big for them. And they live in a world where they're told that they shouldn't be like that. You shouldn't be wearing dresses all the time. You have to have a high power career. I never wanted a high power career. I wanted to be a stay at home mom. That was my thought process of life, right? I wanted to teach and I wanted to do things like that, but I wanted to be a stay at home mom primarily. Um, so for some women, this might be something that feels very natural and right to them, right? And so in their embodiment of it in a nurturing and communal and positive manner, it is absolute femininity that they are embodying and they are sacred with. And yet, if the same woman does not feel that way about what is feminine and instead feels that femininity is fighting, right? That it is feminine to be on a front line, right? Um, that's still feminine and it's still sacredly feminine if they're doing it in a nurturing communal way, right? So many communities don't look at their warriors as people who want to go to war. They look at their warriors as defenders, right? Who are ready to go to war for love of their people. And so maybe we're looking at somebody who is a frontliner who's ready to go to war for their people, for their love of their people. This is a very nurturing and sacred way to do this, right? And if it's somebody who views themselves completely as female, it is a feminine, masculine, or a sacred feminine gender role. It is sacred femininity that is nurturing, that is communal, that is creating this space, creating this within them, right? So when we look at the takeaways with this, what I want you to walk away with today is the idea that gender doesn't have role, that we perceive gender roles. Gender has perception and feeling. These are things that are within us. Other people can perceive what they think we are, but they can never perceive our interworkings unless we express them out loud. So gender is absolutely something that we perceive within us, including what is masculine and what is feminine. It's completely a perception within our own self. Some people might view one thing as masculine and other people might view that same thing as feminine. And that doesn't change whether or not it's masculine and feminine. What changes whether it's sacred or toxic is sacred is about nurturing. Sacred is about providing for community. And I don't mean providing as in I work a job, but I mean providing the nurture for community, right? Providing the nurture for creativity, providing the nurture within the community on a broad scale. So this is sacred. Toxic is control. Toxic is monolithism. Toxic is roles. Toxic is fit into this space instead of be yourself, right? Sacred gender is sacred gender is just self. It's authentic, right? It doesn't conform. It's authentic. Whereas toxic gender conforms and has no authenticity. It's not authentic to self, right? And it doesn't nurture. It does its best to control instead. And so this is the difference, or one of the differences that's easily distinguishable between sacred versus toxic when it comes to gender. When we're looking at these things, it's important to me for people to understand a couple of things. A, We are all nurturing and communal. And the disconnect that you feel because you are not nurturing and communal at this point of time is natural within you. It is exactly how you should be feeling because of that space, right? When something is toxic to you, your body and your brain reacts to it, right? When something harms you, your body and your brain reacts to it. So living in a space where it's harmful to you, where you're conformed to specific things that might not necessarily suit you, and when we're told to do things that are really toxic to our species as a whole, um, if it doesn't feel bad, then that tells you that your body's not working right, right? So the feelings of disconnect, the feelings of pain, the feelings of what the fuck that go along with this is because of the fact that your body is responding and your brain is responding correctly to trauma. Um, the idea that to be a man, you must be, or to be masculine, you must protect and you must provide. And that those are the only things that men do, protect and provide, creates a space where you do not feel that you can talk, creates a space where you do not feel that you can express, creates a space where any nurturing becomes weak, right? And because of this, it creates a disconnect and a dissonance within us that is extremely painful because, as a male, like every other member of our species, you need to have community and you need to be nurtured and you need to give nurture. And so, when you are not receiving nurture or giving nurture and you're not able to commune, right, it's very toxic to you. And to be depressed, to be sad, to be angry is natural, right? And in fact, if you were not, it might be that there is something wrong, right? When we look at women and we look at the gender roles that women are put into, we see this idea that women are only meant to nurture and to have children, which totally negates the fact that there are a lot of women who couldn't nurture a fly. Or rather, that their method of nurturing is not the method of nurturing that we associate with feminine nurturing, right? So when we decide that nurturing is supposed to be in a specific way that doesn't sing to who you are personally, like doesn't concede to the id, doesn't concede to the sense of self, right? So say you have a woman who probably should have never had children because she didn't want children to start with, right? Yet she really likes to throw huge, lavish parties for her entire community, and she likes to cook for everyone, right? And she really loves having nieces and nephews, right? And yet she was expected to have children, and so she did. So maybe she has mental health issues where that one-on-one, or maybe she was severely abused, or maybe she was parentified where she was severely abused and had to actually parent her siblings. And so she has resentment towards other children. So in her parenting her children, she's less able to nurture her children because she has resentment towards them. And yet she's absolutely able to nurture on different levels. Maybe her nurturing is the fact that she's an EMT and she goes out and she heals people every day, right? Yet when we have decided that her role of gender and her role of how she is supposed to nurture is by giving birth, we have destroyed two lives. We have forced somebody into a space that they were never meant to be in. And because we forced them into a space that did not sing to them, we've created a space for somebody else where they're resented. And when you create a space where a child grows up being resented, there's nothing positive about that. There's nothing positive for that child, right? So, because we've decided that the only way that a woman can nurture is by giving birth, nursing, and diapering, right? Instead of understanding that a woman can nurture by going to war, right? By standing a line, by cooking for her entire community, by, doing all of these. Yay. Oh, it was badass, wasn't it? We decide that nurture isn't about role, but about self, right? When we talk about nurturing children to discover the things that that sing to them, it shows them what they're good at, right? And it shows them how they nurture others. So if what sings to me is teaching, then teaching is the way that I nurture. If what sings to me is flint napping, then flint napping and making blades for my entire community is how I'm nurturing my community, right? So when we allow people to nurture in the way that that sings to them, that speaks to them, that fits with them, then they nurture in a healthier way, right? And when we stop this idea that you must sit into this specific role for it to work, and that it's only within this specific lane that you're supposed to do things, we can give people a broader understanding of self and give people a broader sense of self-worth and give people a broader security in a space, right? So again, biologically, we are nurturing and communal and creative. These are things that we can see in the fact that we have mandatory midwifery. We must have somebody help us give birth. That is community. We must have several people to raise a child from neonate to adult, neonate being newborn, adult being currently 25 years and the brain fully forms. This is the most life stages of any creature on this planet. The longest life stages of any other creature on this planet. We have 5 life stages from neonate to adult. No other creature has that. And the longest any other creature has from neonate to adult is the elephant at 5 years. We have 25 years, so 4 times that, 5 times that. This is something that shows that we are nurturing and communal. We must nurture our children to full development. We're not snakes. We can't just lay eggs and go away, right? We have to actually, all of community has to actually be there to ensure that that child grows. So this means that we are nurturing and communal biologically. We are created biologically because we are the only creature that adapts our adaptations. We are the only creature that can look at something and go, oh, I can make that better, right? Or wants to see over the next horizon, or, these are things that are creative about us. So these are things that are biologically who we are. When we have this disconnect, when we have this cognitive dissonance, when we live in a society that tells us that the things that we are naturally are not who we are, we create depression and we create anxiety and we create this disconnect. So all of these feelings are absolutely real. Embodying sacred gender is not embodying a role. It is embodying yourself in the most nurturing and communal way that you can, whatever your perception of your gender is. It's not about other people's perception of your gender, and it's not about a perception of what roles gender has. It is about embodying your truth, your authentic self in a nurturing and communal and creative way. And this gives sacred to your gender. This gives sacred to your role. Roles, again, are weird. We shouldn't have roles. We should all be ourselves, right? Do what sings to us because that makes us healthier and happier as individuals. I'm going to go ahead and take off. I've been here for like 2.5 hours and I got some stuff to do today. I adore you guys. And I want to remind you that all of this, all of your understandings, all of the depression and issues and hardship, right? These things are absolutely why you're valuable, because you can see what's going on and you can feel what's going on. And it is that understanding that is going to help change things and shift them back to what they were before, right? So when you're feeling that disconnect, when people feel itchy and scratchy, and their energy is icky and you can't handle people, as somebody recently described to me, when the whole world feels crazy and you kind of want to hide out because everything's freaky, remember that's a healthy response to trauma. And we are in the middle of trauma. And that it is those who are realizing that are going to pull us out of that trauma. So you are necessary. And remember that your worth and your value to our community as a global community is in your presence, not in what somebody can take from you, not in what somebody can exploit from you, not in what you can do to others, and not about what others can do to you, not about what you allow. Your presence is the growth of our community and necessary. So, especially when you are one of those peoples that can see the shit going on, right? So please Remember that. I know that sometimes it can be an extremely hard thing to remember, and for some of us, it gets dark. So please remember that you are absolutely valuable just by your presence, and that you're seeing what's going on as necessary in our world and our society to affect change for a positive future, a future where we're actually here, because like we're trying to kill ourselves off right now. And that I need you here. So thank you so much, everybody. Remember, you're valuable and worthy just as you are. How people can exploit you is not your worth. Your worth is simply in being. And remember that sacred gender is about not fulfilling somebody else's perception of a role, but about being nurturing and communal and creative and ensuring that you are nurturing the community and the creativity in others. However you perceive your specific gender to be, and however you feel that gender plays a role within that nurturing and community. Um, Fully remember that how we nurture is not gendered. We've gendered it, but how we nurture is not gendered. It is about providing the base and the inquisitive mind and the safe space for others. Have a great day, everybody. So much love to you all. Take care. I'll try and come back within a couple of days, hopefully before the weekend. Maybe not. We'll see. I guess it's tomorrow, but I'll come back soon. Take care. And if you have me on YouTube, it will tell you when I pop up live, because I go live at the same time on YouTube. And you can watch here or there, but at least it will tell you that I'm going live, because I know it doesn't always tell you I'm going live in here. So take care, everybody. I'll see you guys soon. Bye. Thank you so much, YouTube. I adore you guys all, and thank you so much for being over here and for partaking. And have a great day. And remember, all the things that I said in TikTok apply to all of us. You are absolutely nurturing and creative and communal and absolutely necessary just by being here. You don't even have to do jack shit just by being here. So much love to you guys, and I'll see you guys soon.